The gospel this morning reminds me of two stories. One has to do with a group of boys who were told that there was a party, a birthday party someplace near there where they were playing. And so off they went to the house of the birthday celebrator. And there was lots of food. There were candies, there were cakes, chocolate cakes. Of course, there was meat galore and so many other stuff. And towards the end of the spread, the table spread, there were apples and oranges. And there was a sign put up there by one well-meaning sister, religious sister. Please take only one. God is watching you. And so the leader of the gang of boys said, don't go to the apples. God is watching the apples. But you can take as much chocolate cake as you like because there is nothing there that says God is watching us. And the other story has to do with a little boy named Tom. And Tom went for a vacation in the countryside to his grandmother's home. And when he arrived in the country, his grandfather gave him a gift of a slingshot. And he has never played with any slingshot because he came from the city. And so he tried his hand shooting at everything he could see until he saw a duck, a lone duck, walking around the farm. And so he took his slingshot and took his aim. And even if he didn't hit anything earlier, well, he had his lucky strike. The duck fell down dead because he was hit right on the head. But he was so afraid, and so what he did was to hide the dead duck in the barn and said nothing about it. And during lunch, the grandma said, well, Sally, that's the girl who was his cousin, you do the dishes later after eating. And Sally, who saw the deed, who saw the killing of the duck, told Tom, hey, Grandma says you should help in the chores. Remember the duck? And the little boy said, I will. And so he did the dishes while Sally was playing with her marbles. And during dinner, there was another chore. And the grandma told Sally, you have to help me prepare the food and prepare the stove. And Sally told Tommy, no, Grandma, Tommy told me he was gonna help too. And told Tommy, you do the preparation while I'll play with my playmates. Remember the duck. And so he couldn't take it any longer. And the following day, he was so distraught and decided to tell the truth to his grandma. And when he told the truth, Grandma told him, I know. I was at the window and I saw you hit the duck. So you can... And the boy felt a sigh of relief. The grandmother actually forgave him and didn't mind it. But Grandma was at the window looking. Well, I say this because the gospel report of John this morning used two words that sound alike in English. So a large crowd followed him because they saw the signs that he was performing on the sick. But then the same passage a few verses up says, when Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, saan kaya tayo kukuha na ipapakain sa dami ng taong ito? The word saw in the first instance is not the same word saw in the second instance. The word used the first time has to do with just sight, superficial sight. Like I see you that you're fewer this morning than last week. This is a superficial sight. I'm not making any judgments. The rains over the past days probably have frightened the wits out of us. And maybe you saw in the news, again, seeing superficially, that there were floods in Germany, there were floods in Holland, Netherlands. I was talking about that last week. There were floods in Belgium. There were floods all over Western Europe. There were floods in China. There were floods in Turkey. There were floods in Mindoro. There were floods here, everywhere in the world. And still we don't see. And now I am transferring from another meaning of seeing. And this other meaning of seeing has to do with the second word, saw, that Jesus did, saw that a large crowd was coming to him. You can see superficially, you can look and see nothing. You can see with your eyes and have no insight. And therefore what I'm talking about is sight and insight. When Jesus saw the crowds, he saw with compassion. He saw with an insight to the needs of those who were needy. He had an insight as to what they were going to need in a very, very short while. And so that insight led him to ask Philip, where can we find enough food for all of them? But Philip didn't see. Philip saw something else, but he saw the figures. He was a very good accountant. And immediately his mental math led him to say, 200 days wages worth of food won't be enough for them. He was a very good accountant. Probably should be working in central bank, because he immediately saw what it meant, how much it would mean, how much it would take. But the Lord saw something more. And that insight is what we all need to have. Because we all see the news, but we only see the materiality of the news. We all see the same Facebook posts. We all see the same Instagram pictures. We all see the same Twitter postings, microblogs. We all hear the same things from Vice Ganda and Marcelo Santos III and all these social media influencers. But who really see what matters? Very, very few. The Lord asked Philip, where can we find enough food? Philip heard the question, but saw an answer that was a non-answer. And because Philip only saw the surface. But there was one who was not asked, but he saw. He had a very good insight. And probably he was spying on the little boys who were there and said, Andrew said, there is a boy here. I don't know how he discovered it. Probably the boy had a big backpack that was heaving and quite bloated. There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves. I don't know what he needed 5 loaves for. He had a good appetite maybe. But Andrew saw this. And Andrew saw beyond the 5 barley loaves. Andrew saw a potential miracle. The crowds saw the signs. They only saw the wonders that he performed because they wanted more of it. They were needy for more. Andrew saw beyond. Philip saw only the materiality, the finances of it, the quantification of how much was needed. Philip said the right thing. Andrew did or saw the proper thing. And today, I'd like us to be reminded of this. We see problems. We see the pandemic. We see the floods. Well, there was less floods now in Doña Soledad. But you know very well that the creeks have been disappearing over the past 30 years. If you look at the picture of Metro Manila taken 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you would see a lot of rivers and creeks. Now they're all subdivisions, including Doña Soledad. That creek that was big when we were students of theology in Better Living in UST was bigger than what it is now. So what happened? Developers saw signs and figures and peso signs, and they saw development, and they saw possibilities. Now, my question for you and me is this: what do we see? Do we see potential miracles, or do we see the materiality only of what makes us miserable? Do we see only the problems that beset us? Don't we see the graces that enable us to do even impossible things? That little boy who was not stingy with what he had, and he had a generous baon, 5 loaves and 2 fishes, but he gave it away. He allowed Andrew to bring him to the Lord, and that was all that the Lord needed. It was the capital that the Lord needed to do a great miracle. We are on the brink of something great. I was just reading a few months ago a book, the thesis statement of this author whose name I forget. We are on the brink of something. We are always on the brink of something. The politicians are on the brink of winning. The people who compete in Tokyo now at the Olympics are on the brink of winning or losing. We are always on the brink of something. And it all depends how it will turn out. It all depends on what we see. If we have only sight that is material sight, then we see only misery. We see only the quantifiable and not the qualitative. If we have insight, then we see God who stands by the window and knows everything we do and sees everything that we do. But that God who sees and stands behind the window doesn't stand there to look at our faults. He sees our sins. He sees our faults. But more than that, He sees forgiveness, compassion, virtue. He sees everything good, even from humans who are not willing to cooperate. What does God see in you today? What do you see in the rains that will push through until tomorrow, according to prognosis? What do you see in the problems that you have? What do you see in the little misfortunes that you think you're facing? What do you see in the little graces that you receive every now and then, every day? What do you make of it? What you make of it depends on what is your intention for standing behind the window. Grandma's intention was only to see a boy grow into a fine young man and an adult that is responsible. Sally missed the point at that particular point in time, and Grandma, by the way, told Tommy, I saw everything, and I have been wanting to ask you, how long will you allow Sally to make a slave out of you? If you see and you have insight, then you will ask yourself, how long will you allow your neighbor to control your life? How long are you going to allow your husband or wife make you miserable? Nobody can make you miserable without your consent. And today the Lord tells us God sees, and God sees what is essential. But the question is, do we see the same? And that is the challenge.